All right, well, I don't know about anyone else, but my clock says it's officially noon and we are nothing if not prompt. So I am going to begin our program. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Our program is ESG Evolution, What Was, What's Now, and What's Next. I am Melody Rose from Frederickson and Byron, and I am also on our NACD Minnesota Chapter Board. On behalf of the chapter, I'm very pleased to present you with our program today. Before we get into it, I have a couple of housekeeping items to go over. As many of you know from attending past NACD events, surveys are very important to us. They help us learn what we're doing well and where we can make improvements. A link will be included in the chat box prior to the end of the program. We really do appreciate it if you could take the time to complete that survey. I'd like to acknowledge and thank our sponsors for their ongoing support of the NACD Minnesota Chapter. They are Clifton Allen Larson, Frederickson and Byron, Grant Thornton, KPMG, and Protiviti. We also have several of our board members with us today. I want to thank them for their continued commitment to NACD and the Minnesota chapter. We also want to welcome our full board and NACD governance and board leadership fellows who are in attendance. Before I introduce our guest speakers, please plan to join us for these two upcoming virtual programs. International Growth in a New Era on May 13th. This is a joint program with NACD Capital Area and the Minnesota chapter. And then the next one is on May 25th, entitled Secret Sauce to Supply Chain Success. So please feel free to visit our website and join us for those programs. Now, onto the program. I'm very pleased to introduce our two speakers. Bob Hirth and Martha Ha. Martha is Vice President and Chief Counsel for Medtronic, leading the Securities, Corporate Governance and Finance, Mergers and Acquisitions, and Cardiovascular teams. She is also Assistant Corporate Secretary for the company and Chair of the Asian Impact on Medtronic Employee Resource Group. And Bob is a Senior Managing Director at Protiviti and Co-Vice Chair of the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. You'll see how well-versed they are on the topic of ESG evolution as they delve into these topics, how E and S and G have changed over the past decade, key lessons for private companies to success in this evolution, thoughts on wading through the confusion in a pool deep with ESG data, insights into the most current ESG reporting techniques and practices, and how boards can answer the growing demands of internal and external stakeholders. We will have about 15 minutes toward the end of the program for your questions. So if you have some throughout the program, feel free to submit them to the chat box, and I will go through them with Martha and with Bob and Martha at the end of the program. Lastly, we are recording this program, and we will make the link available after today. So please join me in welcoming Martha and Bob.
Hi, everyone. Melody, do you want us to
why don't I get started? You know, one of the things that we laid out here in the beginning, and maybe why some of you have attended, was the invitation. And let me just make a couple comments on what's changed, because some of you think this is brand new, but I'll say it's not new. You know, I think that one thing we miss is companies have always wanted to be good companies. They've wanted to treat their employees well. They've wanted to have good, you know, employee relations. I know that companies have been focused on the environment for a long time. But what's really happening is there are just a lot more stakeholders out there that want to be formal stakeholders. So there's more people that want to have a say in things. And those people are, you know, employees, communities, customers, and the like. And of course, we'll get to the data issue. You know, data is kind of the new gold, and we're awash in data, but it's clearly being used. And certainly there's been some added investor pressure. What I've seen over the years now, you know, investors have always been focused on, is this a good company to invest in? You know, what are the risks? What information am I getting? And what they've continued to ask for now, like other stakeholders, is, you know, more and more information, and that the financial statements alone that they predominantly used to use are in their words, clearly no longer enough. So that'll get to the reporting issue. Remember, reporting, this is not a new thing. So for years, we've had financial reporting. some of you can remember, if you go back far enough, there used to be generally accepted accounting principles for almost every single developed country. So we have that a little bit now with ESG. There's what we call the alphabet soup of reporting, and a lot of different ways you can report. I think what's also changed now is we've had a focus on ESG. We can argue it a little bit, but there's a view that companies that do a good job of thinking about these factors and reporting these factors have higher performance than companies that either ignore these items or don't have much of a say. And of course, I think a big thing that's changed just very recently is companies all across the world setting what we call a net zero carbon goal. And you see large companies all around the world doing that. Certainly what's changed is we have a new US administration that has communicated some viewpoints about their focus. And I would say, Martha might comment on this, that I've said more regulation or regulation in some new form appears to me more likely now, as especially it relates to public companies because of all of the SEC announcements that have been recently made. So those are a couple things, and I'll end with, this is not going away. I have a firm belief that corporate reporting has expanded permanently to now include not just the financial state information we've had for years, but now this ESG reporting as well.
I think that's right, Bob. The only thing I would add to that, and I thought that was a fantastic overview and alignment to all the different topics that we're going to hit on today. But the thing that I would add to that is the pandemic has actually really double-clicked on the S piece, which is the social and the employee impact, and how are companies, public and private, how are you taking care of your employees? And employees first. And then that has also introduced this concept, again, underscoring human capital management and how are we thinking about talent acquisition, talent retention, and development, long-term, short, medium, and long-term. The other thing I will also underscore is the impact of climate change. You know, we all hear about climate change, and some people think it's real, some people don't think it's real. It's actually real, and and it is impacting not just our companies but our world. And so, although there is heavy focus on the S piece, climate change is its little sister right behind it. That's about to grow up and be a big sister soon. So, I just wanted to add those things, Bob.
Yeah, sometimes we get all excited about terminology. I like to use the words extreme weather events. And what you see there is, for whatever reason, and, you could say maybe it's just a period of time, but you look at the impact that some of these hurricanes and floods have had, and the impact now, not just on the people, but on the supply chains and businesses and being able, to deliver things. So I think every company needs to now look at that. Just working with a bank recently, they're really focused on, as they finance a company that has a lot of facilities. It sounds kind of strange, but how many of them are at what level above sea level or below sea level? And that has an impact on what they have there. So, one thing that came up, I know we talked about it as we were getting ready, just our audience today. And I know that when I say the word SEC, some of you go to sleep, but I don't want that to happen. Okay. So, again, part of the invite here was around private companies. So Martha, look, we'll get to the big Medtronics here in a second, but let's talk about people thinking, this doesn't apply. Maybe I should click off. All right. Well, I think there really are a number of private company considerations. Let me go through a few of those, and Martha can pile on. Your next long-term loan, don't be surprised, or even before your next long-term loan, if you start to get some questions about, how many feet above sea level is your building, right? What natural resources do you use? So I think at the private company level, this has clearly been integrated into the credit granting process, regardless of whether you're public or private. You have private investors, and sometimes you have private investors that are external parties. And I think you may find that if they're VCs, private equity firms, or others, they may begin to ask some E and S related questions. And same with insurance. So remember, we talked about the weather events. Those are clearly being built in to the underwriting process and the pricing around insurance and renewals. I think one of the biggest things is for private companies, if you happen to have a customer that's a public company, don't be surprised to now beginning to get some requests about your E and S items. Remember that big public company like Medtronic, they've set some goals, maybe they have some net carbon goals, but they're going to push down a lot of their requirements throughout the supply chain. And then just generally for you to step back, regardless of who you're owned by, you use resources, you use water, you have waste, you have employee relations, you have your own suppliers, and then regulation, as I mentioned, may not come only in the form of Securities and Exchange Commission regulation. There may be other bodies that do that. And finally, I think this is just a great time with the topic for any private company or even a not-for-profit organization to step back and say, with all that ESG noise out there, what do we want to do? What is our story? Are we already doing good? Are we doing good enough? Or do we want to do more good? So Martha, give us some of your views too on this private company issue.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Bob. I mean, the way I think about how ESG should be thought about for private companies is almost exactly the same way as public companies, other than perhaps the reporting and the disclosure may be a little bit more relaxed for private companies. But otherwise, you talked about the changing stakeholder base. The Business Roundtable had 181 CEOs signing on to a letter of corporate responsibility just 2 years ago. And again, these are public company CEOs, but the whole purpose was to acknowledge a broader stakeholder base. And really the biggest one there are your employees. As private companies, let's face it, as good as we are as boomers and Gen X, we've got millennials coming right behind us, and they are going to be the workforce that take us into the next evolution of the corporation, be it public or private. And guess what? ESG and corporate responsibility mean a lot to these millennials. And so just in order of attracting talent and retaining talent, it's imperative that you have you've crystallized your thought as a company. What is our corporate responsibility and how should we be thinking about that? What's the most important priorities? What are the key initiatives for us as a company? And then how are we going to measure that and how are we going to disclose against that? And as Bob was saying, it's true. Companies like Medtronic, when we contract out with other companies, suppliers, when we have contracts with customers, when we have contracts with regulators, when we have contracts with state agencies, we do ask, what are you doing in terms of your ES&G? Because we have to report that all the way through for us as well. So I think, that's the only way to think about it from my standpoint is if you're a private company, ESG should be at the forefront of your minds just as much as public companies.
Yeah, and Martha, Swan, it's just on the employee side, one of my views there is if you don't have a story to tell, there's not a story to listen to. So as employees are considering this company versus another one, if one organization can talk about these ESG factors, and may not be all that good, but at least they've got a story, but the other company has no story, where's that generation going to go to work? I think the other thing is that more and more customers are doing what I call seeking and avoiding organizations. So when they find a company, that's private and, they use recycled materials. They talk about these things. I like their packaging. They don't use as much packaging. That's the company I want to buy from. So I'm really supporting them. But this company has said this. So boy, they have so much packaging. I get really frustrated with that. So you need to think about too, this again, with these stakeholders who all want to say, to me, that's a really good example that customers are sort of, buying or voting with their feet and with the way they want a company to act and do things.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I did think of actually one primary difference for private versus public companies, and that really is around the G. I mean, Bob had hit on, E and S, pretty much private and public, you should be thinking about it the same way. But for the G, the governance aspect, in terms of shareholder rights plans and staggered boards and diversity at your board and executive level. You should be thinking about diversity just from an S standpoint. But in terms of the true corporate governance, you don't have as much worry there as a private company. However, the G also in ES&G refers also to risk management and enterprise risk management of the company. And so there has to be the right governance and oversight for risk at your company, regardless whether it's public or private.
Yeah, and Martha, so when you say those words, my eyes light up because good, bad, or ugly. I was the chairman of an organization called COSO for 4.5 years, and COSO actually has a framework on enterprise risk management. So what we also did, though, is we recently issued some guidance as to how do you take these ESG factors, and to your point, consider them in the risk management program of your company. And so again, public or private, it doesn't matter. You all have uncertainties. You're trying to do things, you've got plans, and the world is not certain. So what I'd like you to think about doing as some of your homework is just go to coso.org. At no charge, you can download the executive summary of the risk management framework, but the full executive summary and the complete guidance around these ESG factors and ERM are also available on the website for free. So again, that's coso.org. And just to add one more piece, as we get to reporting, whatever reporting you do, public or private, I know you want it to be accurate. Accuracy generally comes from having a process, that's defined. Some of us might call that internal control. So while I'm at it, I might also suggest you think about, if you're doing some reporting, what degree of internal control is it under? And at least, again, we believe at COSO that it doesn't matter what kind of reporting you're doing, financial or non-financial, you ought to have some sense of internal control. So there's also some material there that might help you as board members, as managers of companies, et cetera.
One thing I'll add to that, Bob, in terms of internal controls, the thing that popped into my mind is data assurances, right? And a lot of people are talking about data assurances. That's sort of the next step in terms of ESG disclosures. And certainly the rating agencies also look very, very heavily to see whether or not your data has been assured by a third party. But in terms of our public company friends or people who are interested in public company issues, one of them is, do I or do I not, my company, do we actually incorporate by reference our ESG, our corporate responsibility report, sections of it, human capital management? Now the SEC is requiring that public companies report material human capital metrics in their proxy statement. So how do you do that? Well, internal controls is one of the key factors in whether or not, at least we at Medtronic, think about what data can we or should we be filing in our SEC filings. And so you'll see that we have a standalone corporate responsibility report, our integrated performance report. I think we sent that out to everybody beforehand. It's also on our website if you need a soft copy of it. And we have been thinking about what of the data that we actually disclose there, can we or should we start incorporating into our financial statements and into our SEC filings, our Qs and our Ks on an annual basis, and sometimes maybe our annual report. We are also undertaking right now data assurance of certain of our data by third parties. And so that data we will likely be moving into our annual report as well. So I didn't want to go too far, but you did make me think about that.
Sure.
I don't know, Bobby, I think there's a good segue into just sort of wading through all the data that's out there and maybe a discussion between the disclosure frameworks vis-a-vis the rating agencies. And you, as the co-chair of SASB, one of the longest standing, I think, disclosure frameworks. Maybe I turn it over to you to kick it off and open this.
Yeah. So let me dispel a little mystery around SASB. So of course the answer to everything now is to go to sasb.org and take a look at what's there. But very, very briefly, there's a number of ways you can report. Remember, I told you that there used to be all sorts of gap. So you might look at SASB as a generally accepted sense of reporting. What's unique to SASB is it's been developed on an industry by industry basis. So SASB realized pretty early on that when you talk about ESG reporting, a consumer products company is going to go to sleep if you're talking about oil and gas related disclosures. So we've divided the world into what we call 11 sectors and 77 industries. And what you can do is you can go to SASB.org and you can click on the standard section. If you're already a public company, that you can put the name of the company in there or a ticker symbol. If you're not a private company, you'll have to find a public company that is sort of like you. And what it would do, it will lead you to that schema and show you where you map to. And then it shows you the actual SASB standards. It describes the industry. You'll see that our standards are primarily metric driven. So rather than just saying some things, it might ask you to report the total energy consumed % renewable, or the total water withdrawn in a year, or the number of facilities that are in water stressed areas, for example, or the number of security breaches of your IT systems and the number of employee accounts and customer accounts affected. So it's really, I think, unique about SASB. It's the industry approach and the fact that we do ask for some narrative disclosure, but we really look at, get some numbers, because back to the data, that's what the investors, want to be using. So that's a little bit on SASB. And I would say that from the investor perspective, Medtronic reports a lot of data, and there's lots of other data out there, and there's people that are, just scraping everything that's on the internet. So the other point about that is, if you're not reporting some ESG information, especially as a public company, they'll either make it up for you, or they'll give you a big downtick in your rating because they can't find the information, or it's not there. So let me just stop there, because I know I'm not a victim of the ratings. You are, Martha. So you might talk a little bit about how you look at it, what conversations you can have, where you think it's fair, unfair, et cetera.
Yeah, I like how you describe that. I try not to think of myself as a victim or Medtronic as a victim, but you're right. So one of the things that we have been doing as a company, and I know a couple questions have come in on this, so hopefully I'll touch on answering those questions, which is, when is enough enough, and what is it that we should be reporting? So I'll tell you, Medtronic, we actually filed our first corporate responsibility report back in 2008, and we've been filing a corporate responsibility report every at least couple years up until last year, and now we're doing it on an annual basis, and we have for the last few years. The evolution of that report has changed night and day. And some of it obviously is just in response to the evolution and the maturation of our understanding and awareness of what the disclosure requirements are, digging and finding the right people in the organization to actually get the information we need to make adequate disclosures. We have to verify and validate that information internally. Again, it's different from an external data assurance. But in terms of, what data is enough and how do we think about this? I guess first and foremost, we do not cater to the rating. And we have a sustainability steering committee, and our CFO is the chair. There's a lot of our executive committee members there, business folks, supply chain, EHS. They all sit on it. And one thing is absolutely clear is we will not report data only to increase the rating that we get. Now, is it great when we do add disclosures and our rating goes up? It is. But the way we think about it is, first and foremost, we have a materiality assessment. We get a third party to come in to help us really crystallize and define what are the material aspects of our business that impact our day-to-day financial stability and long-term shareholder growth. And they come in, they interview internal stakeholders, external stakeholders. They have their own benchmarking data as well. They put it all together, and then voila, they have a report where literally they will cascade and they'll put in different buckets. Here are your top 9 material issues for the company. These are the things that we need to really focus on, like innovation and access and product quality and safety as a medical device company, product stewardship, integrated care. Inclusion and diversity, huge for us, as well as other companies now. supplier accountability, climate risk, and resilience. So those are some of our top issues. And then from there, once we've identified them, we match them against our mission statements, Medtronic's mission. Then we also, someone asked a question about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. We actually went through a very intentional exercise where we looked through all of the SDGs and we identified 6 of them that match up with our material issues and our mission statements. And those are kind of our guiding lights. And then in addition to that, what we do is we'll go down the different disclosure frameworks. So SASB is one that we've disclosed against for years. TCFD, we've disclosed against TCFD since 2020. The GRI, Global Reporting Initiative, we've disclosed against that since the beginning of time, since 2008. Carbon Disclosure Project, we've disclosed against those that framework since 2010. So it seems like we are reporting against a lot, but they're different reports. So in our integrated performance report, we pick 3 standards actually that we report against. It's SASB, GRI, and TCFD. And then we have employee data that we actually report as well. And what we do is we try and continue to evolve the quality of the data, the relevance of the data, and ensure that the data can be measured accurately and repeatably over time. So that's how we actually think about our reporting and what it is that we actually report against.
Yeah. You know, Martha, you add a color to some of what you said, and we did attach a deck of slides for people that you can follow along or you can use for your own reference. But there's a lot of acronyms you just went through. So CDP is the Carbon Disclosure Project. It's essentially a questionnaire-based type of reporting that each company does individually. It ultimately culminates in a grade being provided to a company from CDP. It's not a small exercise to complete it. Many companies find that they don't have all the information and really go through a process of moving from a not so good grade to a good grade. So that's sort of a separate piece. And there are also many other, I'll say, questionnaires. In fact, there's a whole view that there's questionnaire fatigue. And that's why we need this one set of standards so people can just say, look at what I reported against the standard, no more questionnaires. The Sustainable Development Goals, there's 17 of them. They come from the UN. People think about that as that's kind of the broadest global planetary landscape of items you might think about when you think about sustainability. And as Martha said, what many companies do, they look at those and they say, oh, those are all really good things, but not every one of those apply to us. And then, as you mentioned, you kind of look at the ones that really do and you act against those. The Global Reporting Initiative, GRI, that really is, I would say, the oldest framework that exists. It's headquartered in Amsterdam. Many people think of it as the all stakeholder framework. Remember, we were talking about all these people that want to have a voice. SASB is very, very focused on the investor. GRI, I think, speaks more to many, many more of the stakeholders. And then again, another alphabet soup was TCFD, the Task Force for Climate Financial Related Disclosure. That's something that's come out of the UK. A guy named Mark Carney, who was the chair of the Bank of England, was a big driver to that. And it's a very, I'll say, climate only focused. There is a view when you talked about SASB and TCFD that the SASB metrics fit really kind of nicely within TCFD. And let's confuse people a little bit more with one more item. There's something out there now called the World Economic Managing Stakeholder Capitalism document/framework. It's pretty unique in that all of the big four accounting firms rather uniquely agreed to collaborate and write this book. What they did, though, is they really took all that alphabet soup that Martha mentioned and said, well, let's just pick the best of those things and sort of put that together in a document. So like I said, there's lots of what we might think about as ESG gap out there. There's a big effort from many people to push back on that, including the organizations that we just mentioned are attempting to try to work together. And then one more thing, there's a group called the IFRS Foundation. So remember GAP? We had all this country GAP. IFRS really pulled all that together, and 144 jurisdictions now use one set of financial accounting principles. So there's a view that the IFRS Foundation may be the vehicle to do that very same thing related to ESG.
Yeah, and so I just want to try and help people sort through all the different disclosure frameworks that are out there. And Bob, thank you for actually going through all those organizations, because I was just rattling them off. And so I guess the way we think about it is, again, we start with our materiality assessment in terms of what are the key material issues impacting our company and long-term shareholder growth. And then we marry that to our mission statement, which is our North Star. And then once we do that, we look through the established disclosure frameworks. And I think, there's no magic here in terms of if you report against SASB, you're good. I would be remiss if I actually gave that advice here. It really requires some intentionality in terms of reviewing some of the disclosure requirements from GRI, let's say, from TCFD, because it's climate related. SASB is financially related impacts. And then, if you want to layer on top of that, the World Economic Forum is just coming out with some disclosure standards. And Medtronic has actually signed on to that because, as a matter of fact, we already disclose against 85% of the disclosure requirements that they've listed. And so you'll find as you start to select some of these disclosure frameworks and look at actually what standards apply to your company that are meaningful and have a material impact to your company and key business initiatives, you'll find that, guess what? That same thing can be disclosed under a different framework, maybe a slightly different disclosure, or they add a nuance or 2 or 3 subparts to that. So you'll find that you actually are able to disclose against a number of different frameworks by disclosing conceptually the same thing like product stewardship, or human capital management. So I don't think that there's any magic, and I'm sorry that I can't tell you. If you just disclose against these 2, you're golden. It really is. I would urge you to start with your material issues and your key issues for your company.
Yeah, Martha, on that, in the deck that we provided, beginning at about slide 36, we talk about materiality assessment. We actually give a couple examples. There's a Iron Mountain and Accenture in there, but there are some tremendous reports out there that just do a great job. But that's the way they pictorially or graphically kind of laid out their key issues. Also, SASB actually has a materiality map as well, and the notion of, by these 11 sectors and 77 industries, we have sort of a checkerboard that lays out and starts to darken different areas as the ones that are likely to be material. And those are the ones that actually are the basis for creating a SASB standard. I wanted to go back to one thing you said about assurance. Remember, I said, I believe corporate reporting has permanently expanded. Corporate reporting to date has been that financial reporting, and our system of validation has been third-party assurance, or what many of you know as an audit. Now, Martha talked about the fact that whatever we report, we want to be careful and be sure and do the data assurance and all that. But what is also happening now is some companies are getting third-party assurance on their ESG reporting. And there are actually AICPA standards on how you do the audit work and the formats of reports. And just a couple of companies you might like to look at that actually have that reporting would be Salesforce, Levi has it. There's a company called Vernado in New York. It's an office building company, and you might like to see they actually have two separate opinions from their audit firm on that ESG information. Walgreens is another example. So again, you can also see again how this corporate reporting is following a similar path to the financial side, and whether those 2 pieces ultimately become one or not, we'll see. But there absolutely is a view that this is important information, and just like financial information, it's kind of a trust but verify, right? We see you reported it, and I'm sure you try to do a good job, but we even want more assurance from a third party against some set of criteria to make sure that it's appropriate.
Yeah, I wanted to get your opinion, Bob, on the, so given your position with SASB and your historical knowledge, how do you think about the rating agencies, and how does SASB, being a major disclosure framework or oracle of truth, so to speak, how do you think of the different rating agencies and how your framework actually interplays with how the rating agencies are actually calculating their ratings?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. First of all, I liked your point that I think what you're really trying to say is at Medtronics, we're telling our story. We're telling our story the way we think really portrays our company honestly, accurately, and providing the information, as you said, that we think is most important to our business. And I would never let go of that. Unfortunately, there's a whole bunch of people that are trying to make money or distinguish themselves by having the secret sauce. So remember, forget ESG for a second. Over on the financial side, they're all calculating buy signals, sell signals, neutral signals, right? How are they getting that? Well, they're saying they're using all this data, and some, use a little bit of a scoring mechanism. Most don't. But now, as we look at this other ESG information, they're really doing the same thing. I think SASB supports that in a way, and it's trying to get comparable, consistent, standardized data, not a set of paragraphs, but like I said, total water consumed, percent of your energy use that's from renewable sources, and things like that. So in that way, it hopefully creates some objective information that gets cranked into this rating. I think what you do have to be careful about is, the ratings are just that. They're a little bit of a secret sauce. We've got a slide that says they take a whole bunch of information and data points, and then they have, the secret algorithm and scoring mechanism that gets a number, or gets a grade. And I think you have to be careful of that. So I think SASB supports it in that we're trying to get metrics that are, and again, if you look at SASB, it's not just so total energy consumed percent renewable. There's an explanation of what that means and how you get that number. So I think that's where we're trying to contribute. And I'd say a number of the rating organizations are quite involved with SASB and giving us input.
Yeah, that's actually very helpful, Bob. And I do think that SASB is one of the more clear set of guidelines in terms of what the requirements are or what they're asking for in terms of disclosure. So thank you for that. Keep that up. Good job. But in terms of the rating, on the flip side of the rating agencies, I do agree with you that there's a whole host of data that's available publicly, whether you like it or not. Even if you report not one thing as a public company, these rating agencies will find data on you. They will pick and choose what they can find online. And so you are truly a victim of their assessment of your company's performance under the E, S, and the G. And that's why I think that disclosure is really important for public companies in particular, because then you get to control the dialogue. You get to control the messaging and how you want to present the data and what you want to focus on and why. Again, the other thing is, things like the rating agencies are different. Some of them are relative, so they'll compare you against your peers or what they consider to be your peers. And some of them say that they're on an absolute basis. We're just going to assess you on a standalone basis. But even so, it's not necessarily, I don't know, I'm going to use the word fair. And here's what I mean by that. So ISS, most public companies will look at, most investors will look towards ISS versus Glass Lewis in terms of their proxy advisory firm. ISS has two different reports, two different ratings. They have a monthly quality score that comes out that I get every single month. I'm like, oh, let's see how we're doing. And then they also have an annual corporate rating. It's called ESG corporate rating. And I'll tell you, we actually had a call with ISS. We do this every year, and it's like banging my head against the wall, which is the E and the S scores for this monthly rating, the quality score, is really based solely on disclosure. So whatever you disclose as a public company, that's how they're going to rate you. You can practice in a whole different way. Now, why you would, I don't know, but but it's really just based on disclosure. Their governance score, though, is a balance of what have you disclosed and then what have they observed. So there's a little bit of follow-up of, hey, are you actually practicing what you're reporting? The interesting thing, we're an Irish domiciled company. And so there are certain Irish law restrictions that Medtronic we cannot change because we're required by law in order to do certain things like a supermajority vote for changes of our articles. We get dinged every single year by ISS, and we explain to them this is a statutory thing. We can't do anything about it. And they said, "Oh well, too bad, because we're rating you based on U.S. standards." And so we don't get any break for that. And so that's why I also say let's not cater to the rating itself, because you just have to take it with a grain of salt sometimes.
Absolutely agree. So you hope that over time that people see the ratings just as that. They're people's opinions, right, of the company, and you really need to look at what the company says. So, agreed.
So I wanted to just comment a little bit on the board. I know a couple of questions have come in. I'm sorry, I'm trying to skim through them as fast as I can, and I hope Melody is actually picking them up. But a couple questions came in about the board itself, and in terms of qualifications of board members, and how will this evolution of ESG impact who we have on our boards on a going forward basis, or will it have an impact? And the answer is absolutely it will, absolutely without question. It's interesting, there's an evolution that's happening at the board level as well, and that is to try and convince directors that some of them require no convincing at all, but try and convince directors that this thing called ESG that you can't touch or feel or pick up with your hands is actually critical, and they need to focus on it like a laser. It's really hard, and it requires a leap of faith. And thankfully, our board is 100% on board in terms of the criticality and the importance of ESG. But what we've done is we have to spotlight and we have to give responsibility for ESG oversight to either the entire board or to a committee of the board. And so what does that do? It makes us also look, as we refresh our directors, as some of them retire or step off the board, we look for directors who have had experience, who understand ESG reporting, of materiality, of the rating agencies, and of this broader stakeholder group. So it absolutely is going to impact who we look for and the skills matrix and the qualifications of the directors that we actually hire.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I've seen in the press now too is companies announcing new board members that have ESG qualifications. In fact, the founder of SASB, Jean Rogers, is in demand do big time as a board member for her background. What I'm seeing on governance, Martha, not that it's right, but then companies are thinking about, so is there a committee of the board that should review this or be responsible, or do we need a new committee? So we could argue that, and many companies have a nominating and governance committee. So you might suggest that the G is already covered. And one thing that I've seen in terms of movement is companies actually, in a few cases, they actually announced they created a new committee called the Environmental and Social Committee, not mentioning G because they have G. So not that that's right or wrong, but we've also, I think, included in the materials for the participants something actually that Protiviti wrote on, 10 considerations that board members might have. I want to go back to the private company though too, so we don't have that audience go to sleep. This is a great thing to talk about. So we don't have to do all this reporting, but what do we want to do? What E matters do we have, if any? What S matters do we have? Is there a story we want to tell? Is there something we want to do better at? First of all, how well do we even know we're doing in that area? Do we even have any information? So whether you get to the reporting or whatever, it's clearly a topic that everybody should be aware of. And I think there can be some really meaningful discussion at non-public companies. And I think there'll be really meaningful action. And in the long term, that'll be a better private company when you get done with that.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree on that. And again, you're reminding me that the way I think about private companies and how they should be approaching ESG, other than perhaps the true corporate governance historical corporate governance is exactly like public companies do, which is figure out what your most material issues are that impact your business and your employee base. Who are your customers? Who are your suppliers? What are your products and services that you offer? And take it all the way through the supply chain or the consumables. Take it all the way through and see where you may have issues longer term or short term in terms of the ES or the G. And then I would focus on just thinking about what position the company wants to take on those key issues. And if you're a private company, maybe you don't have to have a disclosure, any sort of corporate sustainability report. It might not be a bad idea. Certainly having one is a bonus, and you can show people that you are serious and that you are taking it seriously. And I actually think it goes quite a long way. And it doesn't have to have necessarily all the bells and whistles that a public company has.
Absolutely.
Bob and Martha, thank you so much. We are coming up on the last 15 minutes, and as Martha highlighted, there are a few questions that have come in, so I'm going to take a few of those. Great conversation thus far. To follow up on a couple of the points that you were just mentioning as it relates to private companies and the importance of ESG topics, regardless of their reporting obligations. You commented on the fact that for private companies, ESG topics are important, even if they don't report. And Martha, you said maybe doing a report is good. If you did, how publicly available would you make that report for private companies? Just for employees, just for suppliers, or would you go ahead and put it on a website, for example?
I would do all of those. I would make it available, in your lobby when people come to your reception desk. I have a nice, pretty brochure that's printed up there. I would send it to my customers. I would send it to my suppliers because there's also expectations that you would have from your suppliers as well. And I would put it on my website, absolutely, because the other thing you do is you attract great PR, good press. And folks will see that. You'll gain new talent. People will be interested in coming to work for you because this company is actually really serious about environmental, social, and governance issues.
Bob, a question for you. You mentioned early on that lenders are using ESG matters in assessing credit in loans. Do you know if, and one of the comments was Fitch ratings analysts are using ESG reports. Do you know if other credit agencies are going in this direction as well?
Yeah, Melody, I do believe so. I mean, they all have got the data, they're seeing the reporting, so you'll see that. I think each company is going to be a little different in terms of who their lenders are, but I know everything from reading ESG reports of banks saying that they're now doing this to proposals actually we're getting to help banks figure that out, to even talking to some bankers and loans they're no longer making because they're worried about a weather-related issue or a technology issue. Good example. So a bank I worked with didn't lend on a truck stop because they thought that there would be driverless trucks and no one needed to rest. So there's all sorts. So yeah, so I think that's getting there. I mean, I think you're each going to have your own experience. It's really two things. It's the lending, but it's also the insurance side, especially the property and casualty coverage that you have.
Thank you, Bob. Martha, a question directed to you specifically. You commented on how boards are in different places as it relates to their adoption of ESG reporting and just embracing the overall concept. What advice do you have for current individual board members or aspiring board members that can help move companies in a positive direction as it relates to ESG matters? And then the second part to that question is, what is the greatest ESG lesson you've learned in going through this process at Medtronic?
So I'll start with the second one first because I'll forget it. In fact, I forgot the first question already. But to answer the second question, what's the greatest lesson is that it takes a long time to move a company in this direction, depending on the size of the company. Fortunately, we have executive sponsors. We have executive members on the team, on the sustainability steering committee, that really firmly believe in the importance of ESG wholeheartedly, and it's completely in line with our mission. But don't underestimate how long it will take to create awareness and understanding, and to create this mind share that will move the entire company in the same direction, and that is towards wholeheartedly embracing the ESG disclosures, the materiality assessments, and just that whole intentional analysis of what is important to us as a company. It takes time. It takes time and perseverance, longer than you think it will. So start now. Start yesterday if you could. And then in terms of the first question was around the board. Sorry, I forgot.
What can an individual do? No, what can an individual director do to help with that long, difficult process?
One of the things I was thinking of as you read the question is benchmarking. Go out there and look at some of the peers in your industry. Go see whether or not they have corporate responsibility reports, any ESG disclosures in some of their public filings. If it's a private company, go on their websites, see if they have anything that's posted that relates to environmental, social, or governance issues. Lots of employee and social justice issues have come up because of the pandemic. So there should be a whole host of information out there, but I would benchmark. That's the best way to help convince people who may be on the fence. Look at, maybe we don't think it's important here, but all of our competitors think it's important, and we're already behind the time here. Let's start making steps, forward. And so I think that's the best thing you could do. Talk to your friends who are directors on other boards as well. See what their boards are doing, see how they're thinking about it, but benchmark and bring that data back.
And maybe even attend an NACD seminar or two on the topic, right,
Yes,
Martha and Bob?
And Melody, I'd agree. I think the NACD is developing more material for this to educate their membership. And I just want to pound on Martha's statement. Look at these other reports. First of all, even if it's not in your industry, some of the effort that goes into these reports, it's just tremendous, just to give you your own ideas of display and how you do things. And then, of course, I think for each of you, take a look at the SASB website or go to GRI, and, the consulting and accounting firms also have material out there. And, I think that another place to start, if you're the lone voice in the wilderness among your board, either you could do it or make some presentation. But I think, I've done a lot of kickoffs with boards that they kind of didn't know at all what was going on here. And just think about what we went through today, just to begin to level set that, explain what it is, give some examples. So that's another way for companies that are at the beginning end of the spectrum, is to have some board education event.
Here's another thing you can do also is do it a little bit indirectly, or directly. Talk to some of your other directors. Ask them what they think about ESG, whether or not they think that the company is doing an adequate job, or you can phrase it a little bit softer than that. So that's another thing you can do, because you can rally a little bit of support that way and then bring the topic up. But the other thing is ask management. Ask management to present on ESG. What are you guys doing? What is the company doing with regard to environmental, social, and governance issues? We hear a lot of what's going on here. There's all this activity going on. There's this business roundtable. There's the World Economic Forum. There's the UN is getting involved. What are we doing? Can you present to us? Then that kind of puts their feet to the fire a little bit. And it would help if you had another director that was on your side saying, yeah, I think that'd be a great idea. I don't know, that's a little sneaky, but.
Yeah, no, I think those are all really good suggestions. As you said, it is a long process, coupled with the fact that, quite honestly, when you say ESG, it can mean different things to different people. So understanding what it means specifically for your board, your company, I think is a critical first step. And I think you both alluded to the fact that getting outside help to outline a plan, a process, and have some accountability through that process can be really helpful as well. I know we're almost done here. I just want to, before I ask another question, I just want to remind our attendees that there is a link to the survey in the chat box. So we encourage you all to fill that out before we close the program. But another question while they're doing that, Bob, while we were preparing for this, and Martha as well, one thing that you hear a lot when you talk about ESG topics is greenwashing. For those in the audience that might not really be familiar with what that is or how to deal with it, maybe you can shed a little light on it for us.
Yeah, so greenwashing, Melody, is kind of like making you look green with green paint when you're not, right? So, but the idea is that you're saying things that perhaps are stretched or aren't true. And this is where, I mentioned at some point, because this information is so important, it needs to be validated. So one answer, if you will, around greenwashing is the ultimate third-party attestation of this information. So there's a view, and it's two sides. It's the companies saying they're doing all these things. I think there was also a comment. It's the asset managers that are selling their ESG products and using, greenwashing in a sense with the way they market those things. And both of those are getting addressed. The SEC has sent notice out on both pieces for the asset managers as to what they need to do to validate that their products really meet certain criteria. And then of course the company reporting. So greenwashing is out there. You'd hope that most companies aren't doing it. But again, this third party assurance, I think, is part of the conversation that's going on to address that term.
I totally agree with you, Bob. And one of the things that, again, we're really intentional about at Medtronic is the facts are the facts and the data is the data, and the data better be good, whether it's in an SEC file document or whether it's a standalone document. Our directors, actually, our nominating and corporate governance committee, they are actually responsible for oversight of ESG for the enterprise. We thought about breaking it up, but there are so many ways to break it up that we thought just consolidating oversight would be most efficient. But they read our corporate integrated performance report, and they hold our feet to the fire, and they say, is there too much fluff in this? Let's stick to the facts. And so you'll see in our report, what we've done is we really are making the data section a standalone section where literally you could pull that section out and get all the data that you need. And then sort of wrapped around that is our story. It's our mission. It's our corporate, that's our social piece where we talk about the stories of our customers and our patients and our suppliers and questions and issues that we've faced and how we overcame them or not and how we struggle with them. But it really is, we try to separate that because that is part of Medtronic. We are a medical device company and we are in it to save lives, and we make, life-saving therapies for critically ill patients. And so that is what we do. And that is part of our story, but the data has to stand alone. So we really are trying to be intentional about that. And again, we're starting to get third-party assurance for some of our data as well.
One key takeaway that as I have listened to you both talk about that rang pretty loud and clear for me is this concept that there are ESG advocates and issues in the world, but this isn't a process where you just take a report and check a box. You have to make it your own. ESG is embedded in every aspect of your business. You just have to see how it is and speak to how that is. And I think it's really important for companies to realize that in some cases they might be doing a lot of these things already. They're just not packaging it in the right way. But if they're not, they should be. So I think it's important that culture aspect and how it affects across the corporation is an important aspect to keep in mind. As we wrap up here, two final minutes. We have some data or information that we submitted in advance, and we'll be following up with our attendees with some other information, hopefully that they will find that useful. But Bob and Martha, any final words of advice and encouragement for those that are stepping into this minefield for the first time, perhaps?
Yeah, so Melanie, let me leave people with three closing comments from me. One is, as I said, this is not going away. And corporate reporting has expanded now permanently. So not to be rude, but you need to deal with it. So It's not going. And I said, there's going to be some choppy waters because of all the alphabet soup and convergent, like any new area. I mean, whether it's 500 car manufacturers and 85 airlines, I mean, this will converge and coalesce over time. Number two, while there's some cost, there's much more opportunity. This is about making a better company that ends up being valued more highly, that can attract and retain employees better. And in a lot of cases, it actually makes more money because of the way they're focused on these issues. And then finally, third point, this is new, get educated. As an individual board member, you can be as expert as anybody because this is, just the beginning of all this.
And the only thing I would add to that is really focus on putting all the disclosure frameworks aside, putting all the rating agencies aside, focus on what's important to your company and your business and your employees and your broader stakeholder base. That's where you start. And then you start looking at the disclosure frameworks and what you need to disclose in order that's in alignment with your key and material issues. So don't forget to really start at that point. Otherwise, you'll be backtracking a little bit.
Excellent. And that's perfect timing too. Wow, it's like we rehearsed this. So thank you. Thank you so much. Lots of thank yous in the chat boxes for your wonderful insights and contributions. Martha, Bob, we really appreciate your time. And attendees, look for some follow-on information. Everyone enjoy your day.